August 1982. Beirut is on fire. Israeli bombs are falling, Palestinian guerrillas are dug in, the entire city is a war zone, and somewhere in the middle of it all, there's a hospital full of children, abandoned children. Mentally and physically disabled kids who can't walk, can't talk, some of them covered in their own filth because every single staff member has fled. And walking straight into that nightmare is a 71-year-old nun in sandals. Mother Teresa didn't call a committee meeting. She didn't wait for perfect conditions. She didn't ask permission from the generals. She walked into bombed-out West Beirut, looked at both armies, and basically said, "We're getting these children out. Tomorrow." The diplomats told her it was impossible. Catholic prelates warned her not to go. And her response? She told the American envoy Philip Habib with complete certainty, "We'll have a ceasefire tomorrow." The next morning, silence, silence. The bombs stopped. And Mother Teresa led a convoy of Red Cross vehicles straight through enemy lines, personally carrying 37 disabled children to safety. Wrapped them in blankets. Watched them get their first bath in who knows how long. Mercury ruled efficiency meets Earth sign stubbornness. See a problem, fix it, move on. But here's what's wild. Her Virgo sun doesn't just explain the Beirut rescue, it explains everything. The obsessive attention to individual suffering. The rigid perfectionism about how service should be done. The controversy nobody wants to talk about. And the nearly 50 years she spent feeling completely abandoned by God while never stopping her work. If you're obsessed with understanding historical figures through astrology, hit subscribe. And I want to know, do you think Mother Teresa's Virgo perfectionism made her a humanitarian icon, or did it actually limit what she could accomplish? Drop your take in the comments because this is genuinely complicated. But before we get into her story, you need to understand what's coming. For nearly 5 decades, the woman who became the global symbol of faith felt absolutely nothing spiritually. Total darkness. She called Jesus the absent one, wrote letters describing her soul as an ice block, and her Virgo chart, it explains why she kept working anyway. Plus, there's a pattern that shows up in Beirut when she's 71. That's when she was 8 years old and watched her mother respond to tragedy. Same energy, different scale. And the Venus placement that explains why she befriended dictators and fraudsters? We'll get there. But first, you need to see where this Virgo perfectionism was built. Because everything, the service, the suffering, the sainthood, the shadow side, it all goes back to childhood. So, Agnes Gangsha Bojakshiu, born August 26, 1910 in Skopje, which was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time, now North Macedonia. Sun in Virgo, we don't have her birth time, so no moon or rising, but honestly, her Virgo sun alone explains so much it's almost absurd. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication, intellect, and analysis. It's an earth sign, which means grounded, practical, focused on the material world. But Virgo's whole thing, service, the 6th house, rules health, healing, and daily work. Virgos are the sign most associated with the healer archetype, the humble servant, the person who finds meaning in the small, practical acts of caring for others. Their symbol is the maiden, often depicted holding a sheaf of wheat, harvest, bringing things to fruition through careful, meticulous attention. Virgos don't do grand gestures for the sake of drama. They do what works. They show up. They handle the details nobody else wants to handle. And here's the shadow side. Virgo perfectionism can become rigid, controlling. Their high standards can turn into judgment. Their practical nature can make them dismissive of approaches that don't match their method. They can be their own harshest critic. And sometimes that criticism spills onto everyone else. Mother Teresa's entire life was the maiden archetype in full expression. Healing through humble work, but it was also Virgo shadow, playing out on a global stage. Both things, simultaneously. For 87 years, keep that tension in mind because it explains everything. Gangsha, her name meant flower bud in Albanian, which her family chose as a small act of defiance against authorities who frowned on Albanian names, was the youngest of 3 children. Her father, Nikola, was a successful merchant who originally came from Mirdita in northern Albania. Her mother, Drain, was deeply religious and possibly from a village near Jakova. The family was Albanian Catholic in a region dominated by Slavic Orthodox Christians and Ottoman Muslims. So, faith wasn't just spiritual for them, it was identity. It was survival. Little Gangsha received her first communion at age 5.5, remarkably young. She was confirmed in November 1916 at age 6, already absorbing the rhythms of religious life, already internalizing the idea that faith requires action. And then when Gangsha was about 8 years old, her father died suddenly. Some historians believe he was poisoned for his political activities. He'd been involved in Albanian nationalist movements that made him enemies. The family went from comfortable to struggling overnight. 3 children, widow, no income. But watch what happens next, because this is where the pattern starts. In the years after World War I, death kept visiting. Gangsha's uncle Mark lost a son to the Spanish flu. Then Mark himself passed from heartbreak. Another daughter and her husband. Then yet another daughter. Gangsha's grandmother. One by one, the extended family was decimated. Only her cousin Philomena survived, and she came to live with Gangsha and her mother. 8 years old, surrounded by loss, random, senseless suffering everywhere she looked. Her mother could have collapsed, could have turned inward. But here's what Drain did instead. She threw herself into helping poor families, visiting the sick, offering what she had even when she didn't have much. She'd bring impoverished neighbors into their home for meals even when they could barely afford their own food. And little Gangsha was right there beside her. Learning that service isn't something you do when conditions are perfect. It's something you do because it needs to be done, especially when conditions are terrible. That's the template. That's the Virgo foundation being laid. Those turbulent, formative years in Skopje, one researcher wrote, prepared her for everything that came after. By age 12, she felt what she'd later describe as a calling. God wanted her to be a missionary. Virgo hears divine instruction as practical assignment. Not someday, not eventually. This is the task. Now figure out how to do it. 6 years later, at 18, she made a decision that would define everything. She left home to join the Sisters of Laredo in Ireland, knowing she would never see her mother or sister again. She kept that promise. Never saw them again. Never even spoke Albanian again publicly. Not even when she visited Albania decades later. There's a story that she promised her mother she wouldn't speak Albanian until they met again. And since they never did, she kept that vow for the rest of her life. Even when her beloved cousin Philomena emigrated to Australia and they reunited in 1969, Teresa insisted on speaking English, and even though Philomena barely understood it, total commitment. Earth sign, follow through, no halfway measures. She arrived in Ireland in late 1928, spent a few months learning English at Laredo Abbey and Rathfarnham, because English was the language of instruction for the Laredo sisters in India. Then she was off. Calcutta. Arriving January 6, 1929. She was 18 years old, halfway around the world from everything she'd ever known, and she would never go back. She took her initial vows on May 24, 1931, choosing the name Teresa, after Saint Teresa of Lisieux, the French Carmelite known as the Little Flower who believed in doing small things with great love. That philosophy, small things with great love, would become the cornerstone of everything. The church assigned her to St. Mary's High School in Calcutta, a school for Bengali girls run by the Laredo Order. She taught geography and catechism. The girls loved her. She was good at her job, really good. Became headmistress by 1944, safe, comfortable, respectable work within the structure of the church. For 17 was her life. Teaching privileged girls inside convent walls while Calcutta's poverty festered just outside the gates. But the thing about Virgo, they notice what others ignore, the small details, the suffering that's right there if you actually look. Calcutta's poverty was seeping through those convent walls. The school was in Intali, and just outside those gates, people were dying in gutters, beggars, orphans, the sick and abandoned. The 1943 Bengal famine had taken between 2 and 3 million lives. Corpses piling up in streets, children with swollen bellies and hollow eyes. Then came partition in 1947. India and Pakistan splitting. triggering one of history's largest mass migrations, millions of refugees flooding into Calcutta. Chaos, violence, suffering on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Teresa couldn't unsee it. Every day, stepping over dying people to get to her classroom. Every night, knowing that people were expiring in the streets just beyond the convent walls while she slept in a bed. The maiden archetype was being activated. But the church wasn't making it easy. September 10th, 1946, she's on a train to Darjeeling for a retreat. And during that journey, something happened. She called it her call within a call, a mystical experience so intense it would drive everything that followed. In her own words, Jesus spoke to her about his thirst for love and souls, about the darkness covering the poor, about his desire for victims of love who would radiate his presence in the world. She had visions, locutions, interior voices. She saw crowds of people covered in darkness, and herself as a little child standing with Mary before the cross. "Come be my light," Jesus said to her. "I cannot go alone." These experiences continued for almost 2 years. Interior visions, a sense of divine calling that was impossible to ignore. Mercury ruled, minds received cosmic downloads as actionable instructions. She immediately started planning. She petitioned her superiors to leave the Sisters of Loreto. The Vatican bureaucracy moved slowly. It took 2 years of letters, applications, permissions through the church hierarchy. 2 years of watching people die while bureaucrats debated paperwork. 2 years of her superiors questioning whether she was being reckless, whether this was truly God's will, or just emotional reaction to poverty. But Teresa didn't back down. Virgo stubbornness meets spiritual conviction. Finally, on August 16, 1948, she walked out of the convent wearing a simple white sari with a blue border, the garment that would become iconic, and headed into the slums of Calcutta with absolutely nothing except her mission. 5 rupees in her pocket, no building, no staff, no organization, just faith and a calling. And here's what nobody told her. The moment she stepped into her real work, the vision stopped. The spiritual experiences that had sustained her for 2 years, gone. Completely. Remember that detail? We're coming back to it. The early days are almost absurdly on brand. She got basic medical training at the Medical Mission Sisters in Patna so she could actually help people instead of just praying for them. Practical skill set before idealistic mission. Then she found some poor children in the street and started teaching them, using a stick to write Bengali letters in the dirt. No desks, no chalkboard, no classroom. Just showing up and doing the thing that needed to be done. She moved into a small room at 14 Creek Lane in Calcutta, a building owned by a family that offered her space. She slept on a thin mat on the floor, ate whatever she could find, walked miles every day to reach people in the slums. 6th house energy. Start small. Focus on what works. Build from there. Within 2 years, 12 young women had joined her, her former students who'd been inspired by her example. But here's what they didn't expect. The woman who'd been their gentle teacher, she was demanding, exacting. Her standards for how the work should be done were non-negotiable. One of those early sisters later described Teresa as the most intense person she'd ever met. Compassionate with the poor, yes, but ruthlessly perfectionist about methodology. October 7th, 1950, the Missionaries of Charity was officially established in the Archdiocese of Calcutta. Their mission? To serve the poorest of the poor, the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, the blind, the lepers. All those people who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society. People that have become a burden to the society and are shunned by everyone. That's not a paraphrase. That's how she defined it. And her approach was textbook Virgo pragmatism. One person at a time, individual attention, not abstract charity. Again, hands-on care. Touch them, wash their wounds, hold their hands as they died. In 1952, she opened Nirmal Hriday, place of the Immaculate Heart, also known as the Home for the Dying. The origin story is brutal. She'd seen a naked beggar boy turned away from a hospital because he had no money. He died in the gutter. Shortly after, she found a woman near a garbage heap, body half-eaten by rats and ants, still alive. Teresa carried her to a hospital and refused to leave until they admitted her. Then she went to the city government. Give me a building. Any building. I'll take care of the people you don't want. They gave her an abandoned Hindu temple near Kali's shrine. Some locals protested. A Catholic nun taking over a Hindu holy site to house dying untouchables? The symbolism was loaded, but Mother Teresa didn't negotiate. She moved in, started carrying people off the streets, one by one, washing them, feeding them, holding their hands as they passed. This is the earth sign, healer in full effect. Not all of us can do great things, she famously said, but we can do small things with great love. The order started growing. Homes for orphans, for AIDS patients, for lepers, for the abandoned elderly, mobile clinics, soup kitchens, schools. Each mission built on the same template: individual attention, hands-on care, spiritual comfort alongside physical need. By the 1970s, the missionaries of charity had spread to 5 continents. Everyone wanted a piece of the tiny nun who walked into slums without fear. But here's what's interesting astrologically. While the organization was exploding globally, Teresa's focus never shifted from the individual in front of her. She'd spend an hour with one dying person while administrators waited to discuss plans for new missions. She'd memorized the faces and names of children in her orphanages. She treated each person as if they were the only person in the world. That's not scalable, but it's deeply, profoundly Virgo. By 1979, when she received the Nobel Peace Prize, her order had exploded. Over 1,800, 120,000 lay workers, missions on every continent, 495 mobile clinics serving over 4 million patients, 103 leprosy centers, 63 homes for the dying. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. But here's the most Mercury-ruled move of all. When they told her about the traditional Nobel banquet, this fancy celebration that costs about $192,000, she said no. Don't throw me a party, give that money to the poor. The Norwegian children collected their own pocket money to donate to her, about $175 from one Lutheran church group. And Teresa was more moved by that than by any of the formal ceremonies. Small acts, individual kindness. She accepted the prize in the name of the unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. She called herself unworthy. And then she used her acceptance speech to call abortion the greatest destroyer of peace in the world. Because Virgo doesn't moderate opinions for palatability. Virgo says what Virgo thinks. Consequences be darned. The Nobel Committee cited her for work undertaken in the struggle to overcome poverty and distress, which also constitute a threat to peace. The prize money? Every cent went directly to her mission. Someone asked her, "What can we do to promote world peace?" Her answer? Go home and love your family. Not a political solution, not a policy proposal, practical action at the smallest scale. Around the world, she said, not only in the poor countries, but I found the poverty of the West so much more difficult to remove. When I pick up a person from the street, hungry, I give him a plate of rice, a piece of bread. I am satisfied. I have removed that hunger. But a person that is shut out, that feels unwanted, unloved, terrified, the person that has been thrown out from society, that poverty is so hurtable. See the individual, address the practical need, leave the systemic questions to others. Okay, so this is where we need to talk about what nobody wants to discuss. The patterns that made her a saint, and the patterns that made her controversial, because Mother Teresa's Virgo chart explains both her incredible impact and the legitimate criticisms. And this is where the shadow side really jumps out. Pattern 1, hands-on healing over theory. She didn't write manifestos about poverty. She picked up dying people. She washed wounds. She held hands. 6th house healers believe action speaks louder than ideology. Pattern 2, obsessive attention to the individual. While politicians talked about poverty as statistics, Teresa saw specific people. She memorized faces. She treated each dying person as if they were the only person in the world. But pattern 3, this is where it gets complicated. Perfectionism about method. Mother Teresa had a very specific vision of how service should be done. Simple, humble, focused on spiritual comfort alongside physical care. And she was not interested in alternatives. Critics pointed out that her facilities lacked modern medical care. Weak painkillers, limited diagnostic equipment, limited antibiotics. Dr. Robin Fox, writing in The Lancet in 1994, described the care as haphazard. Volunteers reported issues with needle sterilization, conditions that didn't meet medical standards. Now, context matters here. India's Narcotic Drugs Act severely restricted pain medications. Hospitals in Calcutta regularly turned away the destitute. Mother Teresa's homes were never meant to be hospitals. They were hospices for people who had nowhere else to go, places where the rejected could at least die with someone who cared. But her statement that there is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot, to suffer it like Christ's passion, that landed badly for a lot of people. It sounded like she was romanticizing suffering rather than relieving it. This is Virgo shadow. The conviction that my way is the right way. The rigidity about method that can look like unwillingness to adapt. The perfectionism that controls rather than collaborates. She was also criticized for her friendships with some questionable figures. Jean-Claude Duvalier, the Haitian dictator. Charles Keating, who'd later go to prison for fraud. Her opposition to contraception in countries struggling with overpopulation. Her absolute stance on abortion and divorce. And the money question. The missionaries of charity received millions in donations. Where exactly did it all go? The Vatican managed most of it, and there wasn't much transparency. So what's happening astrologically? I think Mother Teresa's Virgo wasn't just evolved service. It was also earth sign inflexibility. Mercury ruled conviction that became judgment. Her high standards applied universally whether you asked for them or not. She built something remarkable. But she built it her way and wasn't interested in other approaches. The critics who said she wasn't actually trying to end poverty, they weren't entirely wrong. She said so herself. She told people she wasn't a social worker. She was doing this for Christ, for the church, for souls. That doesn't erase the millions of people her order helped. But it does explain why her methodology frustrated people who thought the goal should be different. The maiden archetype giveth. The maiden archetype judges who's worthy of receiving. And now we get to the part that changes everything. The part nobody knew about until her letters were published after her death. The part that shocked even the nuns who'd worked beside her for decades. Remember how I said her vision stopped in 1948 when she started her real work? That wasn't the full story. For nearly 50 years, almost the entire duration of her ministry, Mother Teresa felt completely abandoned by God. She described her soul as like an ice block. She wrote to confessors that there is such terrible darkness within me, as if everything was dead. She said, in my soul, I feel just that terrible pain of loss, of God not wanting me, of God not being God, of God not really existing. Please forgive my blasphemy, she wrote. I have told to write everything. Where I try to raise my thoughts to heaven, there is such convicting emptiness that those very thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt my very soul. Love, the word, it brings nothing. Think about that. The woman who said became a global symbol of faith and devotion spent 5 decades feeling nothing. No sense of God's presence, no warmth in prayer, no spiritual consolation, just emptiness and work. This started around 1948 to 1949, right when she left the convent and began her mission. The intense visions and spiritual experiences she'd had on that train to Darjeeling, they stopped completely. And they never came back, except for one brief month in October 1958. Pope Pius XII had just died, and Teresa prayed to the deceased pope for proof that God is pleased with the society. And suddenly she wrote, right then and there, disappeared the long darkness. That strange suffering of 10 years. 5 weeks later, she was back in the tunnel. It never lifted again. She called Jesus the absent one. She worried she might turn into Judas. She described her spiritual life matching the physical situation of the poor left in the streets, unwanted, unloved, unclaimed. I call, I cling, I want, she wrote. And there is no one to answer. If I ever become a saint, I will surely be one of darkness. And she never stopped working, not for a single day, not for 50 years. This is such profound earth sign energy. Duty doesn't require emotional reward. Service doesn't stop because it doesn't feel good. You do the thing because the thing needs to be done, whether you feel connected to God or not, whether you feel anything at all. One of her spiritual directors, Father Joseph Neuner, helped her reframe the darkness. Maybe, he suggested, this emptiness was actually a way of identifying with the abandoned Christ on the cross, a way of sharing in the suffering of the poor she served. Mother Teresa grabbed onto that interpretation. "I have come to love the darkness," she eventually wrote, "for I believe now that it is a part, a very small part, of Jesus' darkness and pain on earth." But the feeling never returned. She's 50 years in spiritual darkness, pure will, pure duty, Mercury-ruled, discipline without Mercury-ruled meaning. So here's what I keep thinking about. Was her Virgo chart the reason she could sustain that? The practical earth sign that doesn't need emotional validation to keep showing up? Or was the darkness itself part of the Virgo shadow? The perfectionism turned inward. The critical voice so loud it drowned out everything else. The judgment that became self-judgment. Maybe both things are true. By the 1980s, her health was failing. Multiple heart attacks, malaria, pneumonia, broken ribs from a fall. She kept working. In 1982, she was in Beirut, rescuing those 37 children. In 1985, she went to Ethiopia during the famine. In 1986, she met with President Reagan at the White House and opened houses for AIDS patients. In New York, in 1988, she visited earthquake victims in Armenia. In 1989, she went to Chernobyl, 70-something years old, multiple heart attacks, walking into disaster zones. Nothing slowed her down, not age, not illness, not the complete absence of any spiritual feeling. In 1991, she returned to Albania for the first time since leaving as an 18-year-old. Her family had moved to Tirana after she left. Her mother and sister had both passed without ever seeing her again. Her mother in 1972, her sister in 1973. Teresa hadn't been able to attend either funeral. The borders were closed. The Albanian government wouldn't let her in. She stood on Albanian soil after 63 years, still speaking English publicly, still maintaining that strange emotional distance from her origins. Opened a Missionaries of Charity house in Tirana, met with people who remembered her family, and moved on to the next mission. She stepped down as head of the Missionaries of Charity in March 1997 because her body finally made the decision for her. She had tried to resign earlier, but the sisters kept voting her back in. And on September 5th, 1997, at 9:30 p.m., Mother Teresa died in Calcutta at age 87. She had been in that city for 68 years, longer than most people's entire lives. The outpouring was enormous. India gave her a state funeral, an honor usually reserved for presidents and prime ministers. Her body lay in state for a week. Dignitaries from around the world attended. The streets were lined with mourners. Within 2 years, Pope John Paul II waived the traditional 5-year waiting period and started her canonization process. The normal rules didn't apply. She was too important. In 2003, she was beatified. The Vatican recognized a miracle. A Bengali woman named Monica Besra claimed she was cured of a tumor after praying to Mother Teresa. Some doctors disputed this, saying it was medicine, not a miracle. The Church said otherwise. In 2016, Pope Francis declared her Saint Teresa of Calcutta after a second miracle was confirmed. A Brazilian man recovering from a brain infection. Tens of thousands of people gathered in St. Peter's Square. 15 government delegations. 1,500 homeless people brought from across Italy to attend. Today, her feast day is September 5th, the anniversary of her passing. Her order still operates in over 130 countries. Her white sari with the blue border is recognized worldwide. So what do we make of all this? Mother Teresa's Virgo chart shows service as life purpose. She devoted everything to practical care for the rejected and dying. She built an organization that touched millions of lives. She walked into war zones without hesitation. She saw individuals where others saw statistics. Her Virgo chart also shows perfectionism's shadow, rigid methodology, spiritual comfort prioritized in ways critics found problematic, relationships with questionable people, a conviction that her approach was correct that didn't leave room for other methods. And then there's that dark night, nearly 5 decades of feeling nothing spiritually while doing everything practically. Earth sign duty without spiritual reward. Service as its own meaning. Her critics say she was a complicated figure whose reputation exceeded her actual impact. Her supporters say she was a saint who provided dignity to people everyone else had abandoned. I think both things are true. I think Virgo contains both things. She saw the poor as individuals created in God's image, deserving of love in their final moments. She also had specific ideas about what that love should look like and wasn't interested in alternatives. She accepted suffering as spiritually meaningful. She also lived with her own profound suffering for most of her life. "If I ever become a saint," she wrote, "I will surely be one of darkness." And she was right. That's what happens when the maiden archetype dedicates her entire life to service and keeps serving even when the light goes out. The work continues, the hands keep moving, the dying get held. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love, and whether or not you agree with her methods, whether or not you think the saint title was deserved, that message has outlived her. The smallest act of practical kindness, the person in front of you who needs help, not waiting for perfect conditions, just doing the thing that needs to be done. That's the Virgo legacy. Service without recognition, duty without reward, showing up when nobody's watching, until the very end.